class. We're going to get started on chapter 9 in just a few minutes. But first, let's go back and review some of the things that we learned in chapter 8. Always not a bad idea to go through just a little review before you launch into another chapter. And I can tell you up front, chapter 9, there's a lot of information packed into chapter 9. And this is, I don't know if it's one of the most lengthy chapters we've had, but definitely a lot of definitions, a lot of concepts. Then some of these videos may be a little longer than maybe you're used to. But in chapter 8, we were talking about production cost, and we still, it's always go back to those three pillars. Opportunity cost, self-interest, optimization, and then making decisions at the margin. So the marginal decision rule was a real driver in chapter 8 because for the most part, firms are profit maximizers, and they are looking to determine how to produce the most output at the lowest possible cost. And if they can do that, they're going to maximize their profits. And again, remember the marginal decision rule: marginal benefit greater than marginal cost, keep plugging along. Marginal benefit less than marginal cost, slow down or stop completely. And then if marginal benefit equals marginal cost, you have maximize your net efficiency. So that's the optimal point, is that marginal benefit equals to marginal cost. And when we were talking in chapter 8, we talked about the long run and the short run, and factors of production. And in the short run, typically you've got one variable, and the other variables or factors of production are fixed. And in the long run, everything's a variable. All of your factors of production can be varied over time because you're talking about a longer time horizon. And we also talked about in chapter 8 total product curve versus the marginal product of labor, and the slope of that total product curve is equal to the change in quantity divided by the change in labor, and that turns out to be the marginal product of labor. Makes sense. And then they also define the average product of labor, and that's just the total output divided by the total units of labor. Get your average output or average product of labor. And then they spend a few minutes talking about the marginal, the law of diminishing marginal returns, which that one was one of the more straightforward concepts in chapter 8. And then, especially in the short run, profit maximizing firms have to make two decisions. They have to decide how much to produce, and they have to decide how to price their product. And then in chapter 8, we also talked about total cost, and it's the total cost function is total variable cost plus total fixed cost. Anybody that's had maybe an accounting class or some financial class, those are pretty straightforward functions and formulas that you'll see. And if you haven't and you decide to take some, you're going to get a little taste of it here in the micro class, and then you'll see it maybe in more detail once you get into some of your accounting classes or some of your other finance classes. And the marginal cost, especially in the short run, it's the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity, which you can break it apart and you can say it's the total variable cost. It's a change in total variable cost divided by change in quantity, plus the total fixed cost divided by change in quantity. And because fixed cost, again, it sounds weird to say it, but fixed costs are fixed in the short run. And so the marginal change is going to be zero. There's not going to be any change. So at the end of the day, the marginal cost in the short run is the change in the total variable cost divided by the change in quantity. And then they throw out another formula. The authors have got a lot of formulas running in chapters 8 and 9. And so they throw out the formula for average total cost. It's the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost, and it's all driven by quantities. Remember, average, it's the quantities that are of a goods or service produced divided by some factor of production. And in this case, what you're talking about is your you're dividing it, by quantity. So that's going to get you the average variable cost and also your average fixed cost. In the long run, choosing the right mix and blend of factors of production, that is one of the most important decisions that a firm, I don't want to say has to make, that a firm has the opportunity to make in the long run, is choosing the right mix or blend of those factors of production. And most firms concentrate on the big three: land, labor, capital stock. They've also got the technology of their production process, and they've got entrepreneurship setting over here too. But a lot of those, when they're talking about factors of production, firms are focusing on the big three. And then we talked about labor intensive, capital intensive, and it depends on it really depends on the marginal product of labor compared to the marginal product of capital, and that determines whether a firm or an economy or a market or a global economy is either capital intensive, similar to the U.S., or maybe it's labor intensive, and we'll talk about China. So China is considered more a labor intensive market. In the long run, average cost, and it's always abbreviated in the book, is LRAC. All costs are variables, or all costs are variable. And then they spent just a few minutes down toward the tail end of the text talking about economies of scale. You've got increasing, you've got decreasing, and you've got constant economies of scale. So that kind of wraps up chapter 8. And now we're going to jump into chapter 9, and we're going to talk again. This is a fairly lengthy chapter, and we're going to talk for a few minutes in this first segment and kind of set the framework, the basis of the chapter, and we talk about competitive markets for goods and services. And the definition that they provide you in the text, and hopefully you're reading the text along with watching the videos and looking at the class notes. But the definition they have in the text is when an industry and they use farming a lot as a competitive market, like farming is competitive, prices will be just high enough to keep producers in that industry, but never high enough to earn excess profits. And I grew up on a farm, so extremely familiar with the trials and tribulations of working on a farm and owning a farm. And it's definitely you're never going to make a lot of those. You're just not going to earn a lot of those excess profits. There's too many things that can go wrong, and it's just difficult to earn those excess profits. And then they talk about the range of firms and markets and market economies, and they start out with, it goes monopoly, monopolistic competition, goes to oligopoly, and then it goes to competitive. And most of the firms in the United States, at least, are going to fall in kind of one of those four basic, I guess, call them basic types of markets. And they could, you could have firms that kind of blur the lines of demarcation among those four types of markets. And the text, let's see, we're on chapter 9. I think in chapter 10, the text talks about monopoly, and I think somewhere down the road it's talking about monopolistic competition and oligopoly too. So the text is going to cover all of those as we go through it, but they're kind of giving you a preview of kind of I guess what the authors think, comprise kind of the four main types of market economies. And they make a comment, or they provide a comment that says most firms in a market economy face at least some level of competition from other firms. And I think that's probably a very valid statement, at least in theory. If you're a monopoly, you're a single firm in that market economy, and you can set your own quantities that you produce, and you can set your own price. And but there's not that many true monopolies around, and for that reason, I think that's why the text is making that comment that there's very few firms that don't experience some level of competition throughout the production process. And then they a little nomenclature that they throw out there to you, because you can hear it, referred to as perfect competition. You can hear it referred to as pure competition, but it's the same thing. It's a model of the market based on the assumption that there are a large number of firms produce identical goods consumed by a large number of buyers. And we've talked about that, I guess, some along the way, even one of the earlier chapters. But now they're starting to get into the assumptions that really drive the competitive market or perfect competition. And they start by saying, perfect competition is a model of the market based on the following assumptions. And here we're going to start outlining the assumptions for you. There's a large number of buyers and sellers. Because there's a large number of buyers and sellers, no particular buyer or seller has the critical mass or the market power to determine prices. The goods offered by each seller are identical. Homogeneous product. Can't differentiate. A cell phone's a cell phone. A cup of coffee is a cup of coffee. Bushel of corn's a bushel of corn. You don't have any like Jack and the Beanstalk magic kernels of corn. It's, bushel of corn is just a bushel of corn. Buyers and sellers have complete information about conditions in the market. Unique concept, perfect competition. I've worked in healthcare most of my life, and for the most part, been on the health plan side or the payer side of the house, or the payer side of that financial coin in healthcare. I've done some consulting now on the provider side of that financial coin, and I can tell you that healthcare is definitely a market that is driven by asymmetric information. And I think a lot of markets have, even if they're quote perfect competition type markets, I think there is, this may be an assumption that, and I know why the economists make the assumption, it's so that they can simplify the world and make and provide a model that answers a lot of the questions. But that one's, I don't know, that one could be relaxed somewhere along the way. And then the last one, it says it's easy for new firms to enter the market and for existing firms to leave the market. Seems pretty straightforward. We'll get into that. We're going to go down through these and kind of go through them, a little more detail. But those are the big four. It's the four assumptions driving perfect competitions, and they may not be in the real world or in reality, may not be entirely valid, but they make for a good model. And the model explains a lot of the drivers in a market. So we accept those four assumptions as the drivers for perfect competition, at least the model of perfect competition. And the text, the authors, I keep saying the text, I might as well say the authors do make a comment, no market perfectly meets these conditions. They're upfront about it. It helps economists to simplify the world as they can compare an environment of cutthroat competition to an environment of little or no competition. Again, economists, because we function in a very complex world, we're going to generate assumptions that are going to help us simplify that complex world. Both buyers and sellers have no power to individually influence the price of the product. They are basically price takers. Prices are set by the collective market forces. Think about Adam Smith's invisible hand. Market forces are driving. Market forces will drive a market to equilibrium price and quantity. And let's go back and let's take each of those four assumptions, and we'll get into a little more detail about them. So we'll take the first one. a large number of buyers and sellers. Most economists will say many. What's many? Many. How do you define many? It's kind of like when we were talking about long run, short run. You first time you hear it, you think, how do you differentiate long run, short run? It's not so much a time horizon as it is the factors of production that are fixed and variable. That drives the long run and short run. First time you hear the term, utility and measuring utils, to me, first time I heard, I thought, I don't know about these guys that think they're economists. It's kind of an obtuse way to look at things. But after you've played around in the economic models for a while, and in the economic or environments, maybe as an economist, or maybe just kind of brushing up against the environment, then the yields, they start to make some sense. So when they say many, they're trying to say no buyer or seller has the power to influence the market price. Buyers and sellers are economically small, and the impacts on supply and demand are relatively small. And we'll go back and talk about agriculture. So bushel of corn, bushel of wheat, bushel of soybeans. You have a lot of farmers, and trust me, in the Midwest, in that kind of breadbasket of the Midwest. So if you're looking at, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, maybe on the fringe, you're over here in like Iowa and some of the states, but those big three states kind of in that, the Midwestern part of the United States grow a tremendous amount. Their, acreage is huge for them when it comes to, they're going to produce corn, they're going to produce soybean, maybe they're going to produce wheat. And there are some huge farmers in those areas, have a lot of acreage. They farm a lot of acreage. All you have to do is drive across Interstate 70. You kind of go Columbus, Dayton, Indianapolis, then you're going on towards St. Louis. And so you're driving across there, and it doesn't, it's especially in the spring and early summer, you can see just acres and acres of beans and corn, and you look over at the farmsteads, and huge storage facilities for the grain that they're going to produce. And even with the amount of output that they generate, they still can't really impact the price. What impacts typically pricing is things like natural disasters, blight on the crop, not enough rain or too much rain, or hail comes through and destroys your crop, or something else. Remember we talked about demand shifters, something that's going to shift demand, or you talk about supply shifters, something that's going to shift supply. Those are things that will kind of impact the price. But what they're saying on a large number of buyers and sellers is no one buyer or seller has enough market power to influence the price. So it makes all of the buyers and sellers, it makes them price takers. Identical goods, homogeneous goods, output is identical, perfect substitutes. Bushel of corn that I grow and a bushel of corn that you grow, same corn, maybe a different variety, but it's still, if corn's selling for $4 a bushel, I get $4 a bushel, you get $4 a bushel. Again, no Jack and the Beanstalk, corn kernels that, magic corn. It's a homogeneous product. Same with soybeans, same with wheat. Only way to compete is on the basis of price. Producers attempt to create small perceived product differences. They try, and occasionally you'll have producers that do. And a good example is the organic market. So you go into, then my wife uses organic eggs. She uses organic dairy products. We pretty much stopped there, but you go into the grocery store, there's, several different types of organic milk you can buy in it, and it's going to be priced, it's going to have a higher price point than, a 2%, gallon of organic milk. So we have a higher price point than a, 2% gallon of milk that's not organic. And so there's a little differentiation, but milk's milk. And producers, while they try to create real or perceived product differences, still, to a certain extent, it's just homogeneous type of product. Market power is an ability to set your own price a bit higher. Unfortunately, the market of perfect competition implies that firms have no power to set their own prices. Again, homogeneous goods see to that assumption as a valid assumption. And then we drop down to number 3. We drop down to complete information. And we're talking about opposite sides of maybe the financial coin. And you have a buyer on one side of that coin and the seller on the other side of that coin, and they're competing for the dollar. And the model assumes a perfect playing field. All sellers have complete and identical information. The same with buyers. No power on either side to dictate the market price. So you don't have sellers withholding product for a higher price. You don't have buyers getting aggressive in a negotiation because they want a lower price. Price is price. Again, $4 bushel of corn, $4 bushel of corn. I can sell mine for $4. You can sell yours for $4. If your neighbor down the street wants a bushel of corn, they're going to have to pay $4 for that bushel of corn. So it's perfect information, and the price is set at price. The lowest price that the buyer will pay is also the lowest price that the seller will take. So price is price. Ease of entry and exit. Number of producers and firms will come and go based on competition and the level of economic profits. And they talk about the difficulty in securing the factors of production, because you might, in some markets, especially, and I worked at Blue Cross Blue Shield in Buffalo, and we had a union shop. And if we had decided to exit the healthcare market in Buffalo, we still would have been, you had a union shop with a contract. They were 3-year rolling contracts. You had a lease on the building. You had a lot of capital stock in that building. So ease of entry and exit, maybe a little weaker assumption than some of the others. That all of the assumptions have somewhat of a weakness built into them. But again, it's a model that the economists have come up with, and the authors even talk about long-term contracts with suppliers of factors of production might create issues to exit. What happens if you've got a pension fund, and you got to fund that pension fund? So I don't know. There's if you think back through all of these assumptions, they've all got somewhat weaknesses. When you talk about many buyers and sellers, you talk about homogeneous product. You're talking about ease of exit and entry. You're talking about complete information. In the real world, they may not hold exactly true, but they work really well for an economist when they're developing this model of perfect competition. And we're going to stop right there. And when we come back, we'll kind of get into some more of the aspects of perfect competition. See everybody again in a few minutes.